Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me again on the channel today. I've got something quite exciting to show in this video, and over the past sort of months I've been looking at several medium format modular system cameras, and by that I mean cameras like the RB67 from Mamiya, Hasselblad, several Bronica cameras, and in the end I ended up going for this. Now this is a Bronica EC TL. Let's take a closer look. So the one thing that makes this camera quite special is obviously the through the lens metering, which is what the TL in ECTL stands for. And obviously that means that inside the camera body there's a light meter, and usually with medium format cameras like this you normally have to put on some sort of prism finder, and then that will have a metering system inside that, not the actual camera body. But with the ECTL that is built into the camera body. And another nice thing about this camera is that it actually also has an aperture priority mode. So what that means is that I can just set the aperture that I want to shoot at, and then the light metering system in the camera will choose the correct shutter speed for that aperture that I've chosen. And that's quite unique with this particular age of camera as well, with this coming out in the mid 1970s. This was one of the last focal plane shutters that Bronica built into their medium format cameras, and then shortly after this they released the SQ series and the ETR series. So I thought we'll just have a quick look at the feature set on this camera in a bit more detail. So the first thing to note, obviously on the top of the camera we've got the waist level viewfinder which pops up here, and obviously inside that there is also a magnifier so that you can do critical focusing with it. And then to take off the viewfinders, all you need to do is press this little button on the front of the camera here, and they pop off simply like that. And then we could put on something like a chinmey finder or a prism finder instead of the waist level finder, obviously depending on what subject you're photographing. And to replace that, it simply just clicks back into place. You don't have to press any sort of levers or reset anything to put that back on. It just simply clicks back onto the camera body. So on this side of the camera body, we obviously have the film advanced crank just here, and that has a little lever that pops out, so you can either use the lever to advance the film and cock the shutter, or just use the knob. Either way is fine. I find it particularly useful to just use the knob if the camera's mounted on a tripod, so it just keeps it a bit more steady. But if you're using this handheld doing portraits or something similar like that, the film crank would probably be quite better for that sort of situation. And then here we have the shutter speed dial, and obviously we have the aperture priority mode that I spoke about earlier on, and that's marked with a red A. We have 1,000th of a second, and then with this camera it goes all the way down to 4 seconds being the slowest shutter speed that's capable with it. Obviously with this shutter being electronically timed, we have access to sort of all those slower speeds like that, whereas with a fully mechanical shutter you wouldn't really have access to that sort of speeds on a camera like this. So that obviously makes it quite nice, particularly when you're doing sort of landscapes and you might be using neutral density filters, or perhaps you're doing black and white photography and you've got some coloured filters on the front of the lens. It obviously helps with that. And obviously we have the bulb setting as well, so if you do need to do any sort of long exposures you can do that with this camera as well. And also on the shutter speed knob we also have our dial here for setting the film speed. So if this being a fully modular camera, obviously the film backs are removable on this camera, and to do that all you need to do is just take the dark slide out, slide that into the side of the camera, push it in all the way, and then you simply press that in, and then the back's removable. And obviously you can see there's the focal plane shutter of the camera there, and there's the dark slide that's came across the film gate there, so obviously the film's not going to be exposed when you take it off. And to put it back on the camera, all you do is simply hook it on the bottom and it simply snaps back into place. There's nothing to like reset on the camera body, it doesn't need to be cocked or anything like that. With this camera it just sort of automatically knows where it's at when you put that back on, so you don't have to worry about is the body cocked or not cocked or anything like that. You just put the back on and then straight away you're back into action. Nice thing about these film backs is there's a nice little holder on the back for the dark slide, and obviously if that goes missing you won't be able to remove the film back. You do need the dark slide to take off the film back. These are also capable of taking 220 rolls obviously as well as 120. Obviously 220 you can't really find too much anymore, but I do think there are the odd manufacturer that's now offering 220 rolls of film, obviously giving you 24 exposures over 12 with a 120 roll. Okay, so when we're looking at the film back, we also have a little lever here, and we've got a double exposure mark and then a mark for advance. So obviously if we want to take double exposures, all we do is just flick that round onto the D, a little D mark there, and then we're allowed to take double exposures, and you can take as many of those as you like. Keep cocking the camera and the film won't advance in the film back, and then as soon as you're ready to go on to the next frame, you just flip that back round to A, and then it will start advancing the film onto the next frame as you cock the camera. We just have a little dial there for changing between 12 exposures and 24 exposures, depending if you're using 120 film or 220 film. So on top of the film back, we've got our frame counter just there, and then here's our memo reminder. So for the film stock that you're using, you just rip off the top of the box, that pops up, and you can just pop that in there, and then you know what film stock you've got loaded in the film back. So there's not too much going on the right hand side of the camera body. Up here we've got the flash sync port, and with this camera the flash sync speed is a 60th of a second. And then here this little lever is the mirror lock up, and that does have a little safety button there, so you have to press that button in, pull that lever down, and then that allows you to lock the mirror up. And obviously that's really handy for when we're doing any sort of long exposures, and I use it all the time when I'm doing my landscapes because I don't want that huge mirror flapping around causing any sort of camera shake. And on top of that we just have a cold shoe there, which you can obviously attach a flash or any sort of other accessory that you might like to add onto there. And then obviously we've got the strap plug there, which I didn't mention, we do have one on the other side as well. So if you want to carry this camera using a strap, it's pretty heavy, I probably wouldn't recommend it. You can if you would like to do so. And now we're at the front of the camera, and there's not too much going on here. Obviously we have the lens, and this obviously takes the same lenses that fits the Bronica S range of cameras. So all of those fantastic Nikkor lenses, obviously made by Nikon, they fit this camera. It's exactly the same mount as you'll find on the Bronica S2, S2A, those sort of cameras. So obviously we have the shutter button just here, and that does have a lock which spins round, so if you decide to cock the camera and then place it in your bag, you won't accidentally trip the shutter if it's moving around. And then over here we have the aperture stop down button just there, and that also turns on the light meter. So if you need to take a light meter reading, this camera works off a stop down metering, so the lens will close down and the camera will then take a light meter reading by pressing that button. And in the viewfinder there are the shutter speeds displayed across the top of the viewfinder, and you can see what shutter speed the camera is recommended for the particular aperture that you've chosen. And that does work in the aperture priority mode and when in manual as well. So if you're there manually choosing your shutter speed, you can just press that button and then you can take a light meter reading, and the camera will tell you what shutter speed you need to choose for the correct exposure of the scene that you're photographing. Now obviously I did mention that this camera takes the fantastic range of Nikkor lenses that Nikon made for Bronica in the early days of their camera manufacturing. And to remove those, you simply focus the lens all the way out to its minimum focusing distance, and then there's a little lever on the side, and then they simply come off like that, and then the focusing helicoid stays in place. So with this camera the lenses are separate from the focusing helicoid, so as you can see that stayed in place on the camera body when I've taken off this little Nikkor 75mm f2.8. Some of the larger lenses you do have to take off that focusing helicoid, and there's just a button on the top of the camera body there that unlocks the focusing helicoid, and then that comes off, and then underneath that there's a bit of a larger bayonet mount which those larger lenses that you can get for the system fit into. To replace the lens you obviously just line up the two little red dots that's on the mount and on the lens, and then that just clicks back into place just like that. Bronica even offered a range of focusing screens that were just meant to be used with the prism finder, and these had all the shutter speed numbers along the top of the screen reversed, so that when you use it with the prism finder, they're the correct way around. The focusing screen that I have in this camera is actually one of those focusing screens, so I do need to try and find myself a standard screen at some point. It doesn't really make too much difference in terms of using the camera, it's just when I take a light meter reading, all the numbers are reversed the other way around. So there isn't too much going on the bottom of the camera, but I thought I'd just show you it quickly. Obviously we've got the battery chamber here, and that takes a PX28 battery. It's one of those little 6-volt batteries that quite a lot of cameras around this time started to use, as all these sort of new electronics came into these cameras in the 70s. And obviously we've got our standard tripod socket just there. And that's it, that's all that's on the bottom of the camera. So I just thought I'd show you what the camera looks like with the chimney finder on, and that's the only other accessory that I have for this camera at the moment. I've got 2 film backs, this chimney finder, along with the waist level finder, and then just the standard 75mm f2.8 lens. Now the first thing I done when I got this camera was give it a really good clean, and I also changed the light seals in the 2 film backs that I got with the camera. And then shortly after that I loaded up a roll of Ilford Delta 100 and I headed out into my garden and I shot a test roll. I then developed that just so I could see if there was any issues or light leaks with the camera that could be fixed. And I'll just show you some of those images that I took now. So once I shot that roll of Ilford Delta 100 and I saw that the camera was working perfectly, I thought we would try something a little bit different from what we usually do on the channel. I don't usually shoot expired film, and I think the last thing that I actually shot that was expired was those Ilford FP4 plates that I shot in the Nikkor Ideal here on the channel several months ago. I think it was last year at some point. So I've got several rolls of this Efke R17 film, and on the box it says it was expired in June 1981. So I thought we'd load up a roll of that, head out and do some seascapes here at Holland-on-Sea along the coast. So I've just taken my first shot here. I've been battling with the weather all morning. It's been raining off and on quite heavily, and that's not too surprising, of course, this being the British Isles. I really like this composition that I've found here. There's these rocks that run out into the sea, obviously creating a breakaway so the sand doesn't move around along the coast as much as it would without them. The sea's quite rough today and it's creating quite a lot of white water coming up over the top of these rocks here. And it's created quite a nice composition actually. I'm looking forward to seeing how this one comes out later on. Now I think I might actually take another shot here before I move on. A little bit of sunshine has just broken through the clouds. That's created some interesting highlights on those rocks where the water's on it. Of course, now there's that change in the lighting, I do need to take another light meter reading quickly. This one's going to be at F11, 1/4 of a second. that's shot number 2 done today. I quite like the composition that I've got here, but there's quite a lot of open space here on this water, and there's not really much interest on that side of the frame. So what I think I might do is put on a neutral density filter, and that way I could just smooth out and flatten out the water, and hopefully it will help sort of create an eerie image with this particular seascape that I've got here. There's another thing that I'm not too keen on in this photograph, and that's the wind farm that's in the background. If you just look over onto the horizon there, along the Essex coast here, along Holland-on-Sea, Clacton-on-Sea, Frinton-on-Sea, we have a wind farm out on Gunfleet Sands, and that's been there for quite a while now. Okay, so I'm going to use this Kokin ND64 here, so that will give me 6 stops. I'm not entirely sure on the reciprocity failure of this film. Obviously, with it being so old, there's not too much information online about it. So I'm just going to have to sort of guess the exposure here. Obviously, I can work out what I need by using my light meter, but without really knowing that reciprocity failure, I can't really give it an accurate exposure. So it's just going to be a bit of experimentation, to be honest. Great thing about this Bronica EC TL is that it does have mirror lockup. So before I do all these sort of long exposures, I can lock that mirror up, and in that way I don't have that huge mirror inside the camera body flapping around, creating camera shake. Okay, so I found my next scene here, and it's quite windy, so I won't do too much talking on this particular scene, but I have got a really nice composition set up here, and I have gone for the red filter again, as the sky is quite dramatic in the background there. I think what I'll do now is take off the red filter, and I'll put on that 6-stop ND filter that I've got. So I think that we managed to get some quite interesting results there with that Efke R17 film. There were quite a lot of sort of marks and splotches, and I think even the numbers on the film backing paper had even sort of come through onto the emulsion as well. But nevertheless, it's created quite an interesting series of images, and it was good fun testing this camera further. And I did develop that role in Gradual ST20 as well. Now, there's not too many videos on this Bronica EC TL on YouTube, and I'm quite pleased with this first one that I've put out, and we'll definitely be revisiting this camera in the future. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. I've got plenty of more content coming out in the future, and that's including this Bronica EC TL. You can find more of my work on my website at www.haydenobrienphotography.co.uk. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.